everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is going to be a fun one. Erica Rex will be our co-host today with Elizabeth Anglin. Erica, could you give us a little bit of an intro?
Yes, I would like to introduce Elizabeth Anglin, spirit medium, animal communicator, Akashic record reader, medical intuitive, Reiki master, energy clearer, and most importantly, alien abductee. Her experiences as an abductee and her participation in psychiatrist John Mack's research have informed the field of transpersonal psychology and emergent psychic phenomena. Elizabeth spoke about her lifelong alien abduction and contact experiences at Harvard and MIT, and was the last experiencer to speak in public to the Harvard Inquiry Committee at the open forum at the Mack building before the committee decided to stop investigating John Mack and allow him to continue on with his alien abduction research without censure.
Amazing. The audience, Elizabeth, does know a bit about John Mack. They don't know enough about John Mack, but the tie-in with Stan Grof's work is kind of how we all got to John Mack. I also happen to be from the U.S. Northeast, so whenever I first started learning about John Mack, I was fascinated. And I think they kind of like somewhat parodied him. Parody might not be the right word in X-Files a little bit, which is interesting as well.
Yeah,
so
he said he was the X-Files kind of came about from John Mack. Like he was a big part of it. Chris, what's his last name? Had actually said.
I used to know.
Yeah, Chris. We knew it was right there. So, and I used to think, would you stop doing this because you're making people think you know something and it's all made up. But I eventually got really mad with the X-Files, because they're like, stop it. But it was a good show.
I've got the "I want to believe" poster on the wall. It's usually in all my shots. So I'm really excited to have you, and it's amazing that you did some work with John Mack and you were part of those hearings. At first, Erica, when you were talking about it, I was thinking it was that kind of semi-secret MIT conference that was happening with John Mack's support around abductees.
Was not
so that was like I think there were some gag orders that went out that were like, because there was a book coming maybe. But it wasn't like, top secret or anything like that. It was just publishing secret.
Yeah, because we had National Geographic was there and Newsweek was there and I forget who else was there, especially National Geographic. So that might have been the gag order for journalists that only certain ones were invited. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. So I guess how did this all come about for you? How did where are you from originally? Let's start there maybe.
Oh, well, I'm originally from Michigan. I'm from the Michigan Triangle, which is Lenawee County, Hillsdale County, Monroe County, has an awful lot of alien sightings. And I was born in 1966, right about just before the Michigan UFO flap that got Gerald Ford involved, and where we came up with the committee coming up saying, if you see a UFO, it's Swampcast. Well, thank you. But many people in my neck of the woods saw UFOs. They had farmers seeing them landed in fields, and on and on and on. And even in 1957, my hometown of Adrian, Michigan, had a sighting over the Adrian Public Library and over to Anderson Chemical Company, which is this massive government supplier of nasty chemicals for whatever. But in the middle of the day, there was a UFO over the town of Adrian in 1957. And my dad was there in 1957. My dad is not originally from Michigan. He was from Northwest Alabama, Marion County. And he was an abductee from the time that he could remember. He kept disappearing and getting into trouble and seeing little white men, and they would take him places to go do things. And then his father was an abductee, but only talked to it to the extent of he was taking the back road from Hamilton, Alabama to Hackleburg, Alabama, and lost time and never took that road again. He decided he was never going to take the back road again, and he was terrified of it, and you couldn't get him to go down it. So
this was after Betty Barney Hill, New Hampshire.
Oh, this was all before.
Cases.
Yeah, no, these were all before.
Before
my dad,
Betty and Barney Hill.
Fascinating. Yeah. My grandfather died in around the time their case was. He died in 1965, just before I was born. My dad has memories from 3-4 years old, would have been 1940, 1941, that time period. And so my grandfather was, a 1900s guy. So it was probably the 50s, well, maybe the 40s, 30s or 40s when he had his experience on the road. So part Cherokee, which might make a difference, because if you go back into the Cherokee lore, there was always this guy who would come and take the kids away and teach them things. This little white man, and the guy who did the coloring books, I don't know his name, but there used to be a set of Native American coloring books where you could learn about Native American mythology, and then color some symbology and stuff like that. He actually wrote about that, about what Cherokees happened with Cherokees. And my understanding is that we have some grandmothers and family that got off the Trail of Tears, and because that part of Northwest Alabama was so remote, they just walked away from camp and went up into the hills and reestablished themselves there. They were white enough; they kind of got away with it. But so don't know how much that has to do with anything. Could be Scottish, could be Irish. We're Scottish, Irish, German, Cherokee. So, but yeah, goes way back. My dad, myself, in terms of being abductees in my family, I have a big family, but the original 4 kids, it's my dad and myself are the only ones that really had a lot of experiences. And then my half brother also had experiences, and the rest of the kids seem to get it sideways. So my sister, who is older than me, got me kicked out of, we shared a bedroom. I got kicked out of the bedroom because she didn't want to see aliens anymore. And I appreciate my family for being honest with me and not gaslighting me. No, nothing ever happened. My sister, who doesn't like aliens at all, at least didn't deny it. And my dad didn't deny it, when it came time for me to go through it, re-experiencing things. So
is it usually, sorry to get specific here, is it usually the case that people in a family system will have experiences? So it's not just one person that gets snuck out the window or something?
It's usually, it's generational. It may not be everybody in the family. Gene expression is a weird thing. My take on it is that they're looking for certain types of gene expression that they can use with their tech. And if you have more of that gene expression when you come out, or when they look at the probability field and see you coming out, then you're more likely. But then there's also the spiritual stuff of who were you before, and why did you agree to come in here between lifetimes? So a whole host of factors. If you want to go to the strictly physical, I think it would be gene expression. If you want to go into the spiritual, it'll be, who are you really? Where'd you come from? And what's your point? What's your purpose? So all of those things.
What's your point? Do you know the movie The Point, actually?
Yeah. What's your point?
I think it was Ringo Starr. And somebody else had this movie, The Point. It was a cartoon I watched endlessly as a child, very psychedelic. And Oblio was born without a point.
Yeah, everybody had to have a point in their head.
Right.
Yeah.
It was fascinating.
Yeah.
I loved how you put that. So thank you. And then I guess secondarily, the shared experiences, right? In psychedelia, we can have the experience of telepathy sometimes, but it's poorly studied, right? So we can't objectively say, yeah, in 3 trials we all proved telepathy, right? It's kind of like a chance encounter. And when I hear about abductions, often it's a single person having the experience at once. But the way you kind of talked about it was there's a lot of shared experiences, which is interesting. So is that also relatively common?
Yes, for lifetime abductees. Now, there are other abductees who aren't lifetime abductees, and there are other abductees who aren't necessarily ever physical abductees. They're
Does that mean
astral.
like once or twice having the experience versus like having it for years and years?
Yeah, once or twice. Like, I have a friend in Portland who, I mean, he's religious about watching the alien abduction podcasts and things like that. But he had me look at his experience, and he didn't tell me what he thought about it. I looked and I said, "Oh, they were looking at you for radionuclides. They were going to see what your radionuclide uptake was from this, that, the other, whatever. You seem to be. They checked you out. They got everything they needed. And they took off." And he said, "That's exactly what I thought." It was like, there wasn't stuff from when you were a baby. Nothing happened in your mother's womb. There wasn't any between lifetimes agreement. It was just, you happened to be there. You were friendly. Can we check you out? Okay. And so that happens. And then there's also just sort of people who are easy to get out of body to do astral stuff. That happens where there's just astral contact. But if you're physical, like in my case, in my family, it's a little bit of a more traumatic situation because it can be anywhere from once a month, 3 times a week, from the time you're a kid until you change your universal contract. and
Mm-hmm.
or another agreement about you gets changed somewhere. So and that gets complicated.
Seems
is it
like
okay if I ask?
Go ahead, Ellen. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, at what age did this first start occurring exactly, or do you not really know?
No, I know it was in my mother's womb. But my first memories, your first memories that you remember when you're 3. So my first memory from my book, I was 3. I was 3.5 or 3.25, almost. I was born in January, and that was May. That my first memory was. And so, and it was really traumatic. I thought these bad men who were in these gray robes and didn't have any hair and were, shooting my daddy in the head. And it was a shared experience with my dad. I was in Michigan. He was studying botany at the University of California, Berkeley. And he was on a road trip up into the mountains to collect plants. So one thing about botany is elevation's great because you can get all these different microclimate plants. And he was on a bus, and on a pass, there's a drop off on one side, a really steep mountainside on the other, no place for the bus to go, and a little silver disc landed in the road in front of the bus. And the bus driver freaked out, turned around, tried to back down the mountain, but got frozen before he could put it in reverse. And then everybody missed time for 9 hours. And so that was going on in California while I was asleep in Michigan. And the last thing I remember before I woke up was these bad men having my daddy. And I was saying, "You can do anything you want to me, just don't shoot my daddy in the head." And in a way, that's an agreement, but it's an agreement by force. It's coercion. And where I'm saying, "You can do anything in the world you want to me, just don't kill my dad." And I'm screaming, and I'm like, who has that bandsaw? That bandsaw kind of scream, like only a 3-year-old can do. So I'm screaming. I'm wondering what the bandsaw is about. It's me screaming. And then they're putting what looks like a gun up to his head, and I'm saying, "Oh, you can do anything you want to me, just don't kill him." And the next thing I know, I hit my bed, and I get up and I go tell my mom, that these bad men have my dad and they're going to shoot him in the head, and we need to find out if he's okay. And I won't stop talking about it. And she calls California, and he doesn't call back. And he doesn't call back until the bus gets back, and everybody's confused on that bus because they just missed 9 hours of time. And some of them were probably frozen, but my dad was definitely taken. And so he decided to quit his program. It was post-baccalaureate. He decided to quit and come back home to try to protect me, which didn't work. So, but that was 3. So,
So you
And
talked about contracts, and it makes me think about like consent a little bit. Like these experiencers often have, is that the right term, experiencers?
I would say we coined that during that super secret MIT conference. Yeah. We came and what's funny to me is when somebody says it's experiencers and I'm like, yeah, whatever. I helped coin the term, it's like, don't talk down to me. But I'll get like some researcher who thinks they know everything and is like, shut up. But no, during the MIT conference, we all got together and because some people wanted to be called contactees, some people were definitely abductees, and we said, you know what, we are experiencers. We have experienced something to do with aliens. Let's call it experiencers. And it's not about belief. And that's the other thing. That's why the X-Files made us crazy, me crazy especially. It was like, I want to believe. No, I don't want to believe. Cut it out. I don't believe. I just have to do, So we have really strong feelings. I have very strong feelings. And I think a lot of abductees, if you let them out, you've let them loose and run, they'll be like, yeah, I have really strong feelings about that. But experiencer was a term we said, yeah, that includes contactees and abductees. And the program for extraordinary experience research went along with that. We changed John's what he was doing. He was doing work out of the Center for Psychology and Social Change, which had done a lot of peace and nuclear work before, and a lot of work in the Middle East in the late 70s, a lot of work with kids and trauma and nuclear stuff and dreams about nuclear explosions and things like that.
Worth noting, John was super involved in this stuff generally, not just the whole group, right?
Right. He was super involved in peace. He was super involved in the Middle East. He was super involved in Palestinian, Israeli, and Egyptian issues. And he was super involved with denuclearization and then the trauma of kids in war and trauma. And then also just in the ontology of fear, that fear in general is a traumatic event, and that, our media induced us to fear more than to embrace and to love and be peaceful. So he was really about coming to peace and not influencing more trauma for people and the things that would influence. So fear propagation through the media, fear of animals, sort of how he had his favorite thing was the subvert the dominant paradigm triangle upside down. It was everywhere. If you walked into his office, his house, like he would put it everywhere. And to him, the dominant paradigm was increased fear.
Can you explain that just a little bit in case people aren't familiar with it? Because I'm not familiar with it.
I'm told I lose people when I say the word paradigm.
Okay. So, all right, now I'm really going to lose everybody. So John was a friend of, what's his name? The guy who wrote Tommy. He wrote a book about paradigm shift in science, and he was at Harvard.
Yeah, it was a really important book. Thomas Kuhn.
Thomas Kuhn. Tommy Kuhn.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a good friend to Tommy Kuhn. And Tommy Kuhn wrote about paradigm shift in science and how hard it was because he was a scientific ethicist historian. And the book that you want to read is his really... Kuhn is Kuhn. I forgot the name of the book, and I'm thinking about other things, but... So it's a triangle, and it's not right side up, it's upside down, and it says subvert the dominant paradigm. And sometimes it would be like light coming into the triangle and then diffracting off in the other direction was usually the picture that I remember seeing. And he just had that everywhere. He put it everywhere, subvert the dominant paradigm. And the other way that he put it when we were doing research is we're on the crest of the wave. So it's like the light wave that comes in and then changes things and goes off in a different direction. And that was really what John Mack was about. It was like, it wasn't that he was biased to the extent he wanted to create a new religion, which is what people wanted to say about him, because he all of us who had our own religion got stronger in our own religions in our own way. He wasn't selling us anything new. These were our experiences, and they were going against what the dominant paradigm was. So he was very, very interested. And part of the dominant paradigm in a military-industrial complex is fear, trauma and fear.
Right.
So,
I love that. So I hate to make this all about John Mack. I'm sorry. We'll get back
That's
to
all
you and your
right.
story soon. But I just saw my first video recording of John Mack recently, and it was with Terrence McKenna at I believe, a psychedelic conference or UFO conference. It's
Right, I
awesome.
saw that. Yeah.
Um, I I was blown away, but it made sense to me because this is why John Mack was so popular. He's such an amazing speaker and so convicted, and could speak about how overly Cartesian traditional science and the institutions have been, and even to be able to say that and spell that out is powerful. But
Yeah.
he did it so well.
Yeah. And there is a link, I mean, the Terrence McKenna stuff with, so there are aliens that are completely like non-physical and subtle that I happen to uh, um, I happen to have one, which is a spirit medium. In the traditional spirit medium schools would be considered my spirit operator or spirit controller, and he's a praying mantis that has no actual physical body, you know, and he shows up when my energy gets wonky or when things aren't working right, and just sort of resets me, or does healings on me. But also a spirit operator, a spirit controller, is if you are a medium, you have to energetically, quantum wave wise, energetically connect. In order to connect telepathically with people who no longer have physical bodies, you have to be set at the right frequency. And so your spirit controllers and your spirit operators really perform a vital function in who comes to you out of somebody's family. Are you able to get your signal to connect? Can you get your waveforms to connect so that you can telepathically see what they're showing you, say what they're saying, feel what they're feeling, and give that message? And my controller is a very tall, see-through white praying mantis. So, but you also get that Terrence McKenna talking about that type of alien, I believe, from his mushroom experiences. That
Yeah, DMT, mushroom, all that. Like, it's the praying mantis is a very interesting DMT archetypal figure. It's very common in these experiences, ayahuasca included,
yeah,
which are
I
spirit heavy traditions.
right. But the thing about my praying mantis being is I don't have to be on DMT to see him or mushrooms. I became personally aware that he was there when I was on mushrooms during a mushroom trip in the Jemez Mountains. But then I became aware through various other interactions over time, going through mediumship school, what he was to me, that he is actually one of my protectors. In a way, he's a guide, but he's more of a healer, and he's meant to be, I came here to be a spirit medium, and he's meant there to help facilitate that. And he's not demonic. These crazy people that say, he's just, that's, we probably have some previous lifetime relationship, whatever, but he does a really good job of fixing me up when I get tired, and etc. So um which leads me to this whole other thing about, I'm so sad about how our religions say that there's only one being that can help you, because there are lots of beings that will help you. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm not mad with the one being that, our Western worldview says. I'm not mad with him at all, but, there are lots of beings, and you just have to not be afraid. So.
Mm. So I want to rewind the tape a little bit. Like, when did you, like, how did you find your way to somebody like John Mack? Was it like a therapist pointed him out to say, like, this guy might be able to help you process your experiences, or how did that go for you?
Um, I, it wasn't, I had, it had nothing to do with, like, I was in a bad relationship, and I went to a therapist who gave me some tools to get out of it. So I was, and the reason I was in the bad relationship was a lot of it had to do with the alien abduction stuff. The guy I was in a relationship with, his brother, it was one of those set up alien relationship things, but he was a kind of a con artist, and he was not going to be nice to me over time, and some other things happened. But in the process of me going through getting out of that relationship, what happened as soon as I was out of it is I had a completely conscious experience of aliens in my apartment with me and my cat. And I got physically mind controlled not to be able to move, because I had gone to my bedroom. I used to study in my bedroom. I worked full time, went to school full time. I was working on a history paper, and was about to turn off the lights, or had turned off the lights, was not even anywhere close to being asleep. And all of a sudden I heard noises downstairs, like a big rat or something. And then I heard a lamp crash over downstairs. And then the cat jumped off the bed to go check it out. And then I heard voices in my head having all of this mirth about the cat coming. And I realized that there were probably 5 or 6 beings in my apartment that were not mice, that were that were there. And one of them started thinking, I'm coming up the stairs at me, and I'm going to reach for my baseball bat, turning over. And as I reach for it, I get stuck sideways so that I can just see the top of the landing where this being says he's coming up the stairs and he's going to end up. And I start yelling at him in my head, I know who you are. Don't come up the stairs. I don't want to see you. And then a lot of F-bombs. And anyway, he gets to the top of the stairs and I can't move. I'm still in that position, stuck. I think I can blink. I think that's as much as I can move. And I'm looking at him, and he's saying, hey, we know each other. I know you. You know me. And I'm like, yeah, I know you. And I'm going to move. And he's like, no, really. He's like, look at me. And he keeps saying, look at me. And he turns his head from side to side. And he points out his cheekbones on either side, and the shape of his chin, and the shape of his jawline. And for all regular purposes, you'd think, okay, this is a little blue alien with seal-like eyes and seal-like modeling. But if you look at the cheekbone structure and the jaw structure and the chin structure, it looks like he could be part of my family. And he's saying, and he says to me, see, we know each other. We're related. See? And I'm like, rah! And just dropping F-bombs and getting all sorts of adrenaline up and telling him, I'm going to move. I don't care if we're related. I'm going to move. I'm going to move. I'm going to move. And finally I get up enough adrenaline that I move. Because if there's anything that can stop telepathic control of your body, it's enough adrenaline. And I go to move. I finally move. And as I'm turning over, I have the baseball bat in my hand. As I'm turning over, I see him go up. I have a skylight in my room. He goes up and out the skylight with a thwop. And then I hear 5 other thwops from downstairs. Thwop, 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 thwop. And then the cat comes upstairs, and he's all happy because in this whole conversation with the guy at the top of the stairs, they've been playing with him downstairs with this toy that I made for him, which is a legs pantyhose with a panda on the bottom and a bell on the top hanging from a beam. And you pull on the panda and the bell goes and the pantyhose send the panda flying, and then the cat can jump after it. So all the guys downstairs are having a grand time, and the cat's having a grand time getting played with while I can't move. And this little guy is saying, see, we know each other. We're related. And I'm like, wah! So as soon as that happened, I couldn't sleep. And I knew that a lot of stuff had happened when I was a kid that I just never really dealt with. And I knew, and that I had always been afraid of aliens from the time I was growing up, and, this thing with my dad and the bad men. So I called Budd Hopkins just straight away. And
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Can you share with who he is with the audience?
So Budd Hopkins really opened up alien abduction research. He was an artist from New York. He went to Oberlin. He was a fine artist. He made his money doing that. He was also from Appalachian stock, so he was a good storyteller. And and Scotch-Irish Appalachian, may you get them telling a story, they won't shut up. But he had written a book about, I forgot what it's called now, Intruders. Was his Intruders, or was that Whitley? Anyway, he was the main guy if you felt like you might be an abductee that you could go and see. And in 1987, he came out with a book, and he was all over the news about it. And he really dealt with the traumatic part from oh, poor you've been traumatized and your mind's been controlled and blah, blah, blah. But he organized a lot of other therapists for people across the country and across the world. He did a lot of speaking, and he was kind of the heart and soul of alien abduction research for the late 80s and the beginning of the 90s. And so if somebody knew they were an abductee, they oftentimes would get in touch with Budd Hopkins. And he understood sort of he did a lot of regression work with people. I can't say I don't think that he ever led anybody, but he did a lot of regression work, and he did a lot of connecting people. So at the time, he was trying to get a whole therapy group together and somebody in science to actually study abduction. And John Mack became that somebody in science because he had been doing breath work with Stan Groff. And in him doing breath work with Stan Groff, he came across a memory of losing a daughter when he was Russian to like Mongols or something like that. I can't remember exact details of it, but he had an abducted daughter. Okay. And he really felt all of those feelings of having had a child taken and abducted. And somehow there was a guy who was studying alien abduction at one of his breathwork things, and he had just gone through this experience of having a daughter abducted, and they ended up talking about alien abduction. And John said, wow, I'd be really interested in that. There must be a lot of trauma involved with that, because it's traumatic to have, a kid abducted, I'd be interested in that. And so this person talked to Budd Hopkins and sent Budd to John at the end of 1989. The same night that Budd was interested, because the same night that I had my wake 'em up experience was the same night that Linda Napolitano had the Brooklyn Bridge experience. And so it was the exact same evening. That was her wake 'em up experience, was getting floated out of her window with, we think it was, did we figure out, was it Perez de Cuellar? Anyway, the security detail saw her floating out the window. So he was very, very interested in talking to me because of the timing and because it was 2 wake-up experiences on the same evening. And so he called me right back. And all of your 90s movies and stuff like that, they're really scary. You can thank Budd Hopkins. So, you want to be really scared of your alien abduction experience? Thank Budd Hopkins. Anyway, I actually love Budd, but he got into the fear and terror pretty big.
Mm-hmm. I've listened to a decent amount of recordings with him when I was deeper into the kind of ET UAP topic. Like he was definitely a very regular name in the scene, and it was often like, unfortunately, critiquing his involvement. But I like how you put it. He was a professional fine artist trying to inspire people to do science and like get these people some help.
Right. And without Budd, I mean, he was definitely a leader of all of the people that have come out now. He definitely helped create a platform for us, whether the platform is one that you want to stand on or not now. So, it's up to you. But, and without Budd, I think my butt would be in a sling. I don't think I'd be anywhere near as together as I am in life. And just the whole experience of going through the work with John and all the help that I got, and
and you were actually doing psychotherapy with John?
Well, he can't help but be a psychotherapist. I did a lot of regressions with John. He's a trauma psychiatrist. What's he going to stop being a trauma psychiatrist just because, we're talking about aliens? No, he's going to, he was so great because he would just call you on your BS the moment that you displayed it. He'd be like, well, if you want to know how that person feels, you just go ask them. He wouldn't let you like wander in like relationship stuff. He'd just be like, just go ask them. You want to know if they love you, just go
Right.
ask them. You want to know if they want to hire you, just go ask them. And so all of this sort of stuff that we let our minds spin about and have anxieties about, he would just be like, go do it, which was actually fairly helpful, But then the other thing is he really understood, he took the time. I mean, there are a lot of people doing regressive hypnotherapy now, and they're taking like an hour and a half. You need 3 or 4 hours. So if anybody on here is an abductee, find somebody like from the Michael Newton Institute or somebody who's doing past life regressions where they take 3 hours, please. The folks that say they can do it in an hour or an hour and a half, no, you'll be in the middle of like your most traumatic part and they'll pull you out and then you'll be like, I don't know what happened. And then you'll be really traumatized. So John Mack was great at being thorough. He was so thorough, like he would go over things over and over and over again, but he was really great at being thorough. And he was really kind and very gentle. Mm-hmm. So
I want to talk a little bit about regressions, are you okay with that?
Sure.
Because this is like one of the more controversial things. Like there was all this talk of, are regressions reliable? And I think this actually comes up often in psychedelic experiences too. You recover memories, and then there's the question like, how accurate are these memories? And I've even had a recent friend like have all sorts of recovered memories, and they were like, I'm not just going to say, oh, they're absolutely true as you recall them, because I think that's a risky thing. Like I think people kind of need to sit with it and kind of make up their mind maybe. But how do you like to approach this stuff, regressions and like the recovered memories?
Well, when you go through alien abduction stuff, it's nothing especially when you first do it, the stuff that you remember is nothing that you could come up with from a movie or from your life or from what you know about life. And the physical stuff that happens is so painful that it's nothing that you would want to come up with. It's not like I wanted to have this glorious experience. It's more like, oh my God, I was holding all that pain in my body. No wonder I was eating a whole thing of Oreos when I came back the next morning. I don't have an eating disorder. I have oh my God, I'm in so much pain. What will make me feel better disorder? So you come to all of these realizations from doing abduction regressions that nobody in their right mind would put themselves through that amount of pain. B, you can't even imagine the stuff that you see when you get in there, and you don't have words for it. So you can't talk to anybody about it because you can't describe it because we don't have words for it. And then C, what the heck? How in the world could a movie make you come up with that stuff when there are no movies about it because there are no words for it and there's no ontology for it? And it's so incredibly painful. Why would you do that? So it isn't the kind of manufactured reality that you want to have. And it isn't like, oh, my daddy or my uncle did this to me, which you would pretty much know. It's really complicated and really intense and really painful and really weird. And but the narrative makes sense. Like you go step by step from here to here to here to here to here through all of these things that you don't have words for, that are hard to describe, looking at beings you can't describe because they aren't in movies, because other people don't see them. And even though we have a whole community of people who they think what different aliens are, they still don't get it right. And so, yeah, I really believe in regressive hypnotherapy for alien abduction experiences because it is not something you can fake when you come up with a real thing. You can't, if you're really doing your work, you're not just gonna, it's not like somebody laying down and saying, oh, the Arcturians are telling me a beautiful story about my importance in the world.
I know that person. Yeah. So no, I get you. The way I like to talk about John Mack, and it's a super reductive way, is and regressions kind of a little bit too. It's a way in which you can work with the trauma, whatever that trauma was, and it's not necessarily the case that like we're trying to tackle the thing of it's true in this way or that way, right? It's like you said, it's kind of you're using a lot of language similar to psychedelic language, which is like radically ineffable.
Right.
There's just, it's so hard to bring language to this stuff.
Right. Radically ineffable it's such a good term. I'm going to brand name that. Radically
You got it. It's all yours.
Thank you. But no, and it's hard to talk with. I mean, part of the trauma becomes, if you go through it, you don't have anybody to talk to. And now 30 years later, I don't really, like, Eric and I connected because we both had a different radically ineffable experience. Not, and it was like, yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like, to me, it's not ineffable at all. It's like, oh my God, how many you do? So, and in another way, as an abductee, I tended afterward to gravitate to people who did psychedelics. Now, what would be harmful would be people who would think that their psychedelic experiences were all hallucinations. Because some of the stuff that they were seeing was like stuff I was seeing. And it was like, no, that's not a hallucination. I saw that and I wasn't on anything. Oh, well, then you're just crazy. No.
I think that's, you're hitting a key point for me that I get very exercised, i.e. to the point of anger about, which is that somehow in this world that we're in now, the validity of the psychedelic experience has become more valid than any other kind of experience, because if you give someone a pill and you watch them and it happens, you say, aha, there it happened, I can replicate it. Whereas you can't decide to replicate at any given moment in time your experience or my experience. And the fact that that is the criteria is just hogwash. And I go crazy over it. And there's actually I think I pointed this out to you, Joe. There's a line in, the Aldous Huxley book, his seminal work, which title is now escaping me because none of us can remember
Brave
titles.
New World or Island?
No, his book about taking psychedelics, specific, the essay. You know which one I mean.
Yeah. Doors of Perception.
Doors of Perception. So he's going on about describing some detail of his life, the fabric of his trousers, and it has this certain texture, and he's never appreciated that before. Anyway, great, he's on psychedelics. So then there's another scene there later on when the wife of a very close friend of his has become hospitalized because she's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he's very upset about it. And she's not taking anything, right? And her husband is there and talking about the children and this and that and the other thing, and she's standing there gazing at him, and she says to him, "Why, dear husband, are you carrying on about these stupid domestic details when the light on the tweed of your jacket is so beautiful and so ineffable that we should be looking at that. We should be experiencing that." And her experience is completely dismissed, completely, because she's quote unquote schizophrenic.
Right.
And I just find this curious, the ways we have of invalidating these experiences.
So John took me to a working group at Harvard, to the affect working group. And I've recently had a friend say to me, well, you kind of look crazy because have you noticed your own affect lately? And I'm like, oh God, you're right. But I went to the affect, like when you laugh or when you smile or, So the affect working group had to do with trauma patients and what their, physical affect is. Do you move your lips, blah, blah, blah. What are you looking for in terms of affect when you're looking at trauma patients? And I ended up saying to them, there was 12 of them, and they were from friendly to reserved to hostile. But my whole thing was, please, when you have somebody come to you with who has had an abduction experience or feels they've had an abduction experience, please don't put them in the schizophrenic or the schizoaffective box. Please go ahead and look at this other option. that, you know, if they're highly functioning, because I was highly functioning, going to school full time, working full time, intelligent. I'm a National Merit Scholar. I got a National Merit Scholarship. You know, and they've got all these other things going on, and they come to you with nosebleeds and nightmares of aliens, and their kids have nosebleeds, and don't send them to the schizoaffective box, please. And here's why. And then some were asking questions about aliens and what they look like. And I'd see another one, like, you know, psychiatrists do when they write in their little, you know, scowling. And I could tell, I was like, I just got that one just put me in that box, you know, because telepathically you're on steroids when you're in a room like that. And, you know, I'm like, oh, she just put me in that box, and I got put in that box. Oh, wait. Oh, there's a box. And that was exactly what I was saying. Don't put us in that box. Give us a chance to tell our stories. Give us a chance to, you know, and granted, we do get people who are telling the story who belong in the boxes, but it's the same number of people that are in the general, this, you know, what is it? 1.5% of people are psychotic, schizoaffective. Great.
It's substantial.
Yeah. It's, you know, and they're out there and they're telling stories, but a true abductee will have stories that are so ineffable that they're not, you know, obviously not psychotic. They're not confabulating something because you just couldn't come up with it on your own. But if you get real ones together, like John did, and you find out that you end up with a lot of abductees are connected. They've had experiences together. Some of them are family to each other in one way or another. There's a lot of shared experiences, and people know each other. Other experiencers, if they meet through an experiencer meeting, will find out, oh, right, I remember you from thus and such experience. So, yeah. So there's a reality that kind of goes beyond just not being able to make this stuff up to, hey, and so Julia and I were the first two experiencers to work with John Mack. And it was almost too perfect because Julia knew me from the time I was a kid, and she proved it. She's not a psychic. She's a mom. Her husband was a computer engineer, a highly skilled PhD level computer engineer. She has two kids. The kids are coming down with abductions and nosebleeds. So she goes to John. But when her husband sees me, I'm 11 years younger, he says, oh my God, it's Julia 11 years ago, right? Julia is basically like a sister to me. She's known me since I was a kid. She starts touting off about, yeah, your mom you couldn't stand your mom and you cried. Remember that day we're sitting on the ship and your mom put you in that terrible green Madras orange short set to have you take your school pictures in. It was just so incredibly ugly. And you just were crying because your mom she'd cut your hair all short with like your cowlick sticking up, and she just wanted you to be ugly. And she's like, yeah, that's exactly how I felt. She goes, well, you told me all about that. And then you told me about this. And then you told me about that. I'm like, oh my God. You know, so if you want affirmation, you've got, you know, here are the two of us, the first two. And she's looking, and her husband's freaking out while he sees me. He can hardly contain himself. And she's telling me about all the stuff that I told her when I was a kid. So you think you're not related, but, you know, the true abductees are related in some way, you know. And there's not a ton of us, I don't think. You know, Budd was trying to say there's like 1.3 million, maybe, but that, you know, I don't know. So, any case,
maybe worldwide or something.
Yeah, maybe worldwide. And there are different forms. There's contact and there's astral stuff too. But no, the real take you out in your physical body, make your nose bleed, make you hurt. She was that. I was that. So.
Before we dig a little deeper into the alien
I know, you're
topic,
like,
which is fascinating to me. I'm so interested. I got to watch my tongue because there's a scientific audience that loves to listen to this show. I don't want to sound too crazy, but I'm pretty crazy. So the question is around like psychedelic use post having these experiences, and like how does that play out for you? So you're already like actively in spirit contact, you're doing this kind of work, spirit communication, pet communication, and like what, so you probably know what a normal person's mushroom experience is like, roughly speaking, right? But like how is yours different? Because I imagine it is different.
I don't do it very often. I'm really not allowed to. So I have what happened with me when I was working with John, and this gets into, please look up quantum biology, look up the Penrose Hammerfield work on quantum biology and microtubules and quantum waves as consciousness. So one of the things that happened in 1991 when I was working with John and we went under regression is that we came across an late 1990, early 1991, aliens worked on my head with light to increase neuronal pathways. Okay. They also, I am one of the abductees that has a recovered implant. That recovered implant was part of why the MIT conference happened. It was given to Andy Pritchard, who has every scientific award other than the Nobel Prize, which went to his student. So, not Andy, Dave Pritchard. Andy Pritchard is his wife. Dave Pritchard had that tube that came out of right here in my head, looked at Ann Arbor with scanning, tunneling, and electron microscopy. It was made mainly of carbon-13. At that time, we didn't know carbon-13 was a cool name for graphene, which is a cool material for making quantum computers. And it's a tube.
And that's single strand carbon, from what I understand. Yeah.
That you roll.
It's a fascinating material.
Right. So when we looked at it under a scanning, tunneling, electron microscope, first of all, it was unbreakable in the tensile strength test that they did on it. And then they looked at it with the scanning, tunneling, and electron microscope, and it had a braided structure. And so you had 3 braids at the atomic level. So, God, what would be better to bounce fermions off of, or bounce whatever quantum waves off of, or however you're going to say that. So anyway, look at Penrose's work in quantum biology. Look at tubules in your brain, and the ontology that perhaps consciousness is not. It's not a fake thing. It's a real thing that permeates all of reality and all of the cosmos everywhere in the universe, and that your brains, even though they're wet and mushy, they've now come up with some research that says yes, wet and mushy tubules work just as good as cold. That was the criticism. Where was it going with this? Anyway, what was the question again?
It was more about like the psychedelic experiences you've had and how do they differ from normal people.
So they differ because a lot of my brain was pre-set up to do the stuff that your psychedelic experiences are teaching you about, in my opinion. So the aliens worked on me physically with light and to open up neuronal pathways and tubules and things like that weren't there before. They worked on me physically with implants. I had a lot of very painful experiences with things being stuck in my head, and then a few days of pain afterwards. So a whole scaffolding was put up in my system that you guys probably don't have. But that's okay, because you can have more fun and it doesn't hurt as much, and you don't feel like you're scared and going crazy. But when you're working with psychedelics, you're basically opening up all of those abilities that the aliens were doing with a more jackhammer sort of way. But you want to be careful that you're doing it in a non-jackhammer sort of way. Like sometimes your psychedelics can send you up so far that you end up coming down with a splat. So go, follow set and setting, follow dosaging, be careful. Don't just say, I'm going to go do this ayahuasca and I'm going to get totally addicted to it and the rest of my life is going to go splat. Because one thing that happened with the aliens is, okay, after they worked on my neuronal pathways with the light, the next day I was seeing through walls, and I was seeing astral beings, and I was seeing different things that were happening around us and kind of the scaffolding of our shared reality. Well, that happened to Julia too, around the same time. And this was probably something they wanted John Mack to know about. So that's why it happened around the same time. But mine was done by beings that sort of know about that stuff in a very controlled way. And so later on, it wasn't until 1994 I started doing mushrooms. And I hadn't done drugs like psychedelics before that. And when I did mushrooms, I was able to make more sense of what had been done to me in a kinder, gentler sort of way, and come to more understanding of my connection to all things, the sun, trees, consciousnesses and things, consciousnesses and trees and beings. And at the same time in 1994, when I was doing all these mushrooms, I became an animal communicator. And a really good one immediately. I learned Reiki 2, which has a protocol for distance Reiki, which is where you can connect to the consciousness of any living being anywhere in the universe. And I was doing mushrooms. And I met for spirit medium purposes, the praying mantis, who is my spirit controller as a spirit medium, and found out what our relationship was. And that came about through doing mushrooms. So mushrooms can help you, understand who out there in the astral plane and the mental plane and the higher planes, or the more ineffable realities, is connected to you and trying to help you learn and grow and do some stuff with your mind and be connected to everything through consciousness, not in a fearful way, but in a highly skillful means, compassionate, fun. Look at the light in your tweed jacket, way. So I would just say it sort of was for 1994, 95, it was where I sort of was able to come to a kinder, gentler understanding of my own consciousness. And I did this in combination with doing Reiki. I became a Reiki master. I did mushrooms. I still had regressions. I did regressive hypnotherapy through 1997. I became a spirit medium in 1997, did remote viewing in 96 and 97. So it's sort of
like a Monroe Institute thing with remote viewing, or what was
I did
that
Farsight. A lot of people that were related to John went to Farsight because they were at the Star Knowledge Conference and we were at the Star Knowledge Conference. So Monroe Institute gives me a headache. I mean, the remote influencing stuff works, but it's kind of like you want to go beyond what your ego desires are to be safe, and sometimes they don't. But and now I'm not. If that works for you, that's great. But I've just noticed. So anyway, it sort of ushered me into a kinder, gentler relationship with all of this stuff. Now, for you, one of the things we say in spirit mediumship is kind of have a relationship glasnost, where trust but verify. Try to find some people to support you. Trust but verify what your experiences are. And keep going, but don't make yourself go splat, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So in a lot of ways, I think you just, in your experience, it was, you were very primed to have these psychedelic tools work differently for you, and it sounds like be a lot more powerful. When I've had experiences with people, like when I've shared trips with people who kind of lean psychic, it's fascinating and really wild sometimes to watch how it looks relative to, let's say, your average human, right? It's a very different presentation. They have to take it a lot more seriously in the way you're describing it. But even anybody can. what I find so fascinating is how powerful psychedelics are, and anything can happen to folks. Like you could just, be the, very conventional middle class person, and all of a sudden you're having the most intense interdimensional experiences for years.
Yeah.
Years and years after like one or two major psychedelic experiences. This is who you are now, and it's radically shifted you. And I appreciate that, and that's a heavy part of it. Some people are horrified by that. I'm kind of into it. But I hear what you're saying. It's very serious stuff, and very powerful in ways that we don't really fully understand yet. And that's kind of why I'm pushing for so much research now.
Right. We don't understand our own minds. We don't understand consciousness. We have a religiosity around understanding what ego is. Like I grew up thinking that ego is this terrible thing. And now I'm like, no, it's here to keep you in your body, so understand what your little brain farts related to your ego, which is, I have to do this, or I'm not enough yet, or blah, 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 or I'm in control of this. I'm going to buy this because it makes me feel in control. Like my ego is still going, blah, blah, blah. But it's all about being safe in your body. And when you work with your consciousness, it's kind of not a thing, because it doesn't matter where your body is or if you even have one. At all of these different levels of consciousness, you're going to find bodies all over the place. And eventually, this one is just really a temporary meat sack. So, get over it, ego, and this personality is a temporary thing, and get over it, ego. But all the religiosity, and even in science, the paradigm becomes, skeptical scientists have their own religion, which is they are the authorities. They've replaced God.
Absolutely.
And so, would that we could get over that. Would that we could study some quantum biology and some quantum mechanics and what our consciousness actually is, or go closer toward understanding what it is, and the cosmology of where consciousness exists and how it exists, and different, attractors and time frames and parallel realities and all of this wonderful stuff that's out there, that if you start really digging into the cosmology of physics, you start to see, wait a minute, that's just like this experience I had over here. And, without having a voice in your head saying, no, you're obviously schizophrenic, which I thank John Mack for, because he actually did make me go through all the testing. So you guys know, I got tested 6 ways from Sunday and sideways.
Well, he was a psychiatrist after all, He had to do that.
So. Yeah. So, and it's been, because I went through all the testing, I haven't had the testing lately, but if somebody says you're just nuts, I can say, no, I've had more tests than you have. None of that came up. Makes me feel better. So
one thing I love about this story and narrative is how in line it is with the category transpersonal psychology, right? It's such like an inclusive framework for radical fringe experiences, that we can have a lot of experiences, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're ill or crazy, right? It's you're a human having an experience, just like many other humans through history having really wild, far out experiences. And yeah, like the McKenna line's coming up for me. Reality is stranger than you can suppose. And that's a paraphrase from a sci-fi writer too. It's not his line, but it's really, really helpful for me, because our traditional mammalian mindset is not really well designed for this. Trying to understand this really crazy
You don't know
world.
what you don't know. I mean, you can't project into the world what you don't have any
experience,
or understanding of. So
I had a thing happened when I was working with John. My mother used to tell me I had an incredible imagination. And there was a day, I was a kid, and I was out playing. My neighbor had a corrugated plastic wellhead cover, and that was on our property line. And next to it was this beautiful spruce pine tree. In Michigan, we have all these different kinds of pine trees, and this was like this long, drooping spruce. And I was throwing rocks on the corrugated to see what level, like, could I get to the furthest side without the rock popping over? And then I'd give myself points. So I'd created like this carnival game. Well, at some point in playing this game, I look up and there is this shifting triangular craft over my head. And all these triangles in it are like lattices, and it's shifting. And it parks on my front lawn, and these friendly crocodiles get out and they say, "Hey, are you bored?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I was kind of bored. Well, you want to come do something?" "Yeah, okay, let's do it. You guys seem really cool. What is this?" you know? So, and then right after I say, "Yeah, let's do it," I don't remember anymore. And I find myself asleep under the pine tree that's right next to the corrugated wellhead. And I'm so excited that I had a good day because I had been bored. I run into my house and I say to my mom, "Mom, I was just out with the friendly crocodiles." And she's like, "There are no friendly crocodiles." I'm like, "Oh no, they have a spaceship and it's made out of triangles." And she goes, "There are no friendly crocodiles. Are you sure they weren't alligators?" "No, they were crocodiles." And she goes, "You have such a vivid imagination." And come to find out, they were reptilians of a relatively friendly sort at that point. And so, and I just went, "Oh my God, I have no imagination. My imagination is for crap." I'm going through all this alien stuff, and it was all supposed to have been my imagination, and it was real. What the heck, man? So, sometimes, like you're saying, you just can't make this stuff up. There's no imagination that's good enough. Mine wasn't. So sad. So sad.
So, before we close, I'm really kind of curious about Rudolf Steiner had this book called Spiritual Ecology, and I find that title super interesting because there's so much out there, and we don't know very much as a culture yet. Like, how do you conceive what's going on in these spaces? How do you like to, I know that's probably like a dissertation and a half, but like, how do you like to think about it and communicate it to like a more popular audience, maybe?
So, things I would say to look up Penrose's work on, with Hawking, on the structure of physical realities. Look up spirit mediumship training goes over. So we have stacked energetic states. So, and then we have the Penrose stuff you want to look at because it starts to get into parallel realities. I have done quantum jumping. I believe a lot of the alien stuff that appears to be time travel has to do with quantum jumping. That we have these tubules that are like corn on the cob, that, ships come in and out of dimensions that are parallel realities. And then there's interdimensional spaces. There are beings in interdimensional physical spaces that live there. And a lot of the biological ships that you'll find are these beings that have been harnessed to do physical quantum jumping, which can also be time travel, but you can't time travel in the dimension that you're in back and forth, but you can time travel in the next door dimension. So it gets weird about, what place and time are these aliens from, because they're jumping through parallels and dimensions and through interdimensional space. And sometimes they're dealing with stuff that's in the future in the parallel. And sometimes they're dealing with stuff that's in the past in the parallel. Or like the picture of the guy who's in modern clothing, if it hasn't been disproven, he could have gotten there by way of aliens from a parallel. So you can go into the past in the parallel. You can go in the future in the parallel. You can't do it here. So these tubules are like corn on the cob. There's a limited number of parallels, but you want to look at, what is it? Scalar attractors. Like, what actually is a scalar attractor? So that infinity shape that's supposedly the butterfly wings, and how in a fractal reality that goes boundaries to infinity, these scalar attractors line up. So, and if you're looking at that fractal reality, so for example, if you and I went to the astral plane right now, we just died, we're dead, body's gone, and we're in the next reality, it's a fractal of this reality that's closer to the wavelength of our actual consciousness. So the other way that I look at it is, if you're talking about astral plane stuff, we're closer to our actual physical quantum waveform of consciousness. So what we think about becomes reality really quickly. And we experience that reality also physically, but it just happens really quickly. So we think, oh, it's not, it's not physical, or because we're in this physical state, we don't physically see grandma. Grandma's having her own physical astral plane reality. And she's a fractal, so it's a waveform, a quantum waveform with an eye applied to it that is a different size, dimension, energetic quantum state than what we're at. If you go up to the mental realm, where people will see other kinds of beings and angelic type of beings and guides and things like that, you have yet again another fractal. And if you're in that state, you experience it as a physical, but its actual energetic component is resonating at a different frequency. So you don't see it here, and you can't physically grab it here unless you do some really wonky quantum work that we're not at yet. And so, and then that has its corresponding fractals, and on and on and on. And so there's an Escher, Penrose goes over an Escher painting of the boundary of infinity that has the fish in it. It's like our dimensional reality, our consciousness reality, where we can go and where we exist, is just like that picture of the fishes. The fishes think that their only reality is that the size that they're at. But no, they're on and on and on and on into infinity. The scalar tubules that he goes over, that was something the alien showed me. In the book Abduction by John Mack, they say you need to bring all times to one place. So when you're doing your psychedelic experiences, think about, with some intention, would it be like if I brought all times to one place? And they showed me sort of a matrix grid that, look at Penrose's Nobel Prize talk. They showed me a matrix grid that had all these cones, but it was, what they had done is they had done a waveform, and that your consciousness can go off, it can go straight ahead, or it can go off in all these multiple directions from, and he's got a picture of the cones, which is very similar to what I was shown. And you're talking about the effect of time in a gravitational system that's physical, but then he goes into, but it's fractal, and there are different waveform states and they're different energies. And so you know, physics is talking about this, but none of us really do physics because we're too busy watching Netflix and wondering what happened to the Kardashians. So, you know, it's out there. The stuff is out there. Like, how far can you go with it? How many different dimensions are there? I don't know. I'm not going to be limiting on that, but go look at Penrose, Roger Penrose, and go look at quantum biology and start looking up microtubules and, you know, what consciousness is as far as we've gotten with that in terms of quantum states. And I think you'll start to see there's going to be overlaps with our spirituality and our spiritual practice and our spiritual experiences through psychedelics and other means. So, blah, 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 blah.
Wow. Erica, do you want to ask anything else?
Can't really think of anything else right at the minute.
That was a great whirlwind tour.
Yeah,
I loved it. Yeah. Yeah, when people usually talk about quantum and spirituality, I'm like typically rolling my eyes, but you use the catchphrase quantum biology, which I just started reading about somewhat recently. And like this what we kind of lean on is often we're trying to interpret reality with a Cartesian Newtonian mindset. And this is a big thing for Mack and Groff and others of their ilk, was we need to get very post-Newtonian and Cartesian. And where are our biases
have you
in
read
that frame?
The Cosmic Serpent?
It was wild. Yeah.
Did you read it?
Elizabeth, have you read that one?
No, I think I was
Jeremy
going to
Narby.
Okay.
It's very good. And actually, he goes almost as far as he needs to, but he kind of steps back, like, I better not really go here because, they're going to think I'm a kook. He it was too bad. He kind of like, well, wait, no, we really need you to go there. It's short. It's quite short.
John did the same thing for us as abductees. Like, he would not, when it came to working with his colleagues, he wouldn't say that there was a physicality about what we went through. He was like, I think the spiritual realm is trying to give us a wake-up call. And we had just been through all of this heavy-duty physical psychic trauma and nosebleeds and thing coming out of my head, and so yet he won't go there. But that's
right. Because
that's
nobody wants to be laughed out of the room.
right. Everybody wants to be able to
creditable.
stay in the room. Right. And
Yep.
but you got to go there in order to get the work done.
Yep, absolutely.
And eventually you got to publish over there in order to get the work done. So,
Yep.
Everybody.
Yeah. He was wildly fringe, and like, I feel like if he went any further, he just wouldn't have ever made progress. But that's me as somebody who never knew him, speculating. It's this idea of like pragmatic progressions through these really complex systems that we have to get through, and it's tough, it's heavy and obnoxious because we really feel things quite deeply, sometimes know things quite deeply, and have to hold back, and we really just want to be able to speak our truths often, and it's sometimes quite hard and disincentivized radically in some cases.
And we saw, so Dave Pritchard was gonna use me as a guinea pig for just a very quick physical experiment. And he was gonna weight my bed and have a camera in my bedroom that I would turn on at night, although I could have been abducted whenever. But he was gonna weight my bed and see if the camera fuzzed out. He was gonna do like mechanical weights on the bed to see if, when I was having an experience, did my bed register that I wasn't in it? And he tried to get one of his grad students to do it, and the grad student freaked out, and he said, I'll never get hired if I do this work. Like, I have a brilliant career as a physicist ahead of me if I don't do this work. So we never weighted my bed, which was such a simple thing to say, is there a correlation between her bed weights, and the times that she is having these experiences. And he was going to put a camera outside my house, which I thought would have been cool, like, look at the sky above my roof. But the kid wouldn't do it. And so there's all this science that hasn't been done on abduction, looking for proof. And Dave finally came up with what you need is a crashed spaceship that still works with a dead alien inside. And that's your proof. And yeah.
But I think actually the Pentagon probably has that, but they're
not going to show us.
Don't know where it is, or they don't want to know where it is, or it wasn't ever cataloged because by definition, and the only people who know are the people who didn't do the briefings because it was all so top secret. I mean, as you point out, there are materials that were found that don't exist as compounds in this particular reality we have. They are something else, or combinations of chemical elements that may exist, but we haven't done them on Earth, but they happen to be there. And it's you can't get anyone to sort of fess up.
All right, well, let's wrap here. I really appreciate both of your time. This is really fun for me to dig into a topic I love so much. So thank you both. And I hope in the future we could do something else. Elizabeth, what's the name of your book if people want to scoop that up?
So it's called Experience. It's on Amazon. Experience, Memoirs of an Abducted Childhood. I am sorry it is not written in typical narrative form. It's written in a bunch of short stories over time, or little tiny narratives over time that lead up to when I met John Mack. And there's another book that's supposed to be coming, which Erica's going to help me do an actual narrative on, I hope, that about the research, which has a lot of complicated facets and where I tie in all the little stories from my childhood. But every single one of those stories has something to do with being an abductee, even though you might not recognize it. Be like, why did you put this in here? And the second book, hopefully when it's done, will explain why it made a difference. why it's something that I included. So we were just talking about how the ineffable experiences are hard to write in a narrative. I'm glad you said that, Erica, this morning, because
Yeah, yeah. I know what, ironically, Joe, I just should add this. I was working on the last chapter of my book, which is about my 5-MeO experience in Paris. And trying to describe it is quite difficult. I've gotten it sort of halfway described. And the language that you have to use is so not equal, but we do our best. See what we get.
Yeah, how do we help people experience things we've experienced that not many people have experienced? Anyway, the book's called Experience. Right. And it's on Amazon. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you both.
Thank you. It's great.